I rise today to state my firm opposition to this bill, the Statutes Amendment Mineral Resources Bill, and state that I will not be able to support this bill in its current form until significant amendments are agreed to. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill is too eerily similar to a bill those opposite tried to push through whilst last in government. In fact, I've even heard it referred to as such by the Minister, and that alone should be a reason enough for people on this side of the chamber to oppose this bill. I took great delight, Mr Speaker, in driving farmhouse to farmhouse during the state election campaign, decrying the previous government's attempt at a mining bill. Basically, I stopped in at the houses of farmers and made 3 points to them. I said the balance has not been achieved between competing land uses. I said that there had been not enough meaningful, legitimate consultation, and they're trying to ram this through at harvest right when you are at your busiest time. Needless to say, Mr Speaker, each farmer was already aware of the ills that were being perpetuated against them and were incensed that something so impactful could be conducted in such a disrespectful way. While I was at their house, I looked them right in the eye and said words to the effect of, "Don't worry, the Liberal Party is a party of regional South Australia, and I'll do my best to make sure that this doesn't happen under our watch." Mr Deputy Speaker, I did this with the consent and even the accompaniment of MPs in this building at that time. Indeed, that commitment remains in writing on the GPSA website, promising to consult in a thorough and meaningful way because the Labor bill does not get the issue of competing land uses right. That letter was from the former Minister for Primary Industries, and it's pleasing to note his support as a former shadow and disappointing to note that that support appears to have changed portfolios. That being the case, I now feel obliged to do my utmost to ensure that this doesn't happen under our watch, and I fully intend to deliver on the promise I made at the very least. This new government has done a great deal of good for farmers in South Australia. ESL bill reductions, which were disproportionately affecting regional landowners, the waiving of stamp duty on multi-peril crop insurance, mandatory farm debt mediation for those in financial difficulty, a great deal of good. Unfortunately, this bill is not one of those goods, and they will all be for naught if farmers are forced from their land because politicians prioritise mining over what is an existing, sustainable, viable family business. The timing of this bill is incredibly disappointing, Mr Deputy Speaker. The government is repeating the errors of the previous Labor government. We have scheduled this bill for debate in the midst of harvest, and not just any harvest, Mr Deputy Speaker, but a very difficult one. Quite a few farmers from around the state are carrying the cost of a relatively dry year and pinching pennies to ensure that they have enough seed to plant in the hope of a better year ahead. The only thing that can make a dry year worse, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a storm right in the midst of harvest, which South Australia endured last week, adding to the stress levels for primary producers altogether. The only thing that can make a dry year worse, as I said, is a storm. Those that weren't lucky enough to get their crops harvested prior to the storm, hail, wind and all the other elements hitting are likely carrying the cost that comes along with that storm. And I note more untimely rain today, Mr Deputy Speaker, which has allowed the gallery to be so full. There was no need to impose this extra unnecessary stress of bringing the bill which impacts them directly on for debate while our food producers have had to deal with a difficult harvest. It would have been my great preference, Mr Deputy Speaker, if this bill could have been debated outside of harvest and we presented a party room paper with an option for a harvest moratorium and time to engage in thorough and meaningful consultation like we promised. But unfortunately, that was voted down. Those who know me and those who are starting to know me understand that I do not oppose my party easily. But such is the discontent among Narungga constituents about the legitimacy of the consultation that Labor entered into during their attempt to revamp the mining bill last year, the same consultation that my party has relied on to reform the mining bill, that I feel I must. The landowners of the electorate view the consultation as a sham, of delegates at information sessions there simply to tick off a box. They were there to tell the farmers how the bill was going to be constructed, not to earnestly listen to their submissions. I remember even in the Guide to the Bill glossy feature that Labor released, selectively quoted from the ag sector. I recall vividly that GPSA CEO, former GPSA CEO Darren Arney, his submission on behalf of the grain producers of South Australia in the glossy report only featured the part of the submission that endorsed a small part of the bill. That suited their argument, not the plethora of objections that GPSA had lodged. It was outrageous, but as I have already alluded to, the former government didn't believe it had the electoral imperatives to produce a mining act. They didn't believe they had the electoral imperatives to produce one that benefited regional South Australia, but this government does and should produce a mining bill that is markedly different from the one currently on the table. Unlike the previous government, Mr Deputy Speaker, we care what the electorate thinks. I remain immensely proud to be a part of the Marshall Liberal government, and even with the disagreements I've voiced around this bill, it is a tremendous honour to be part of a government that cares, and I'd like to acknowledge the Premier for his tremendous leadership thus far. We need to ensure that we continue to do that, continue to listen to the electorate in this case. Lobbyists, peak bodies, industry groups are all important and need to be listened to, but it's the people on the front line who deal with these issues that are the most important in this case. In this case, that is the farmer. They need to be listened to, and importantly, they need to actually be heard. On this front, I applaud the Minister, who has visited Maitland twice, on the second occasion fronting a rather hostile crowd organised at a farming forum in Maitland by the York Peninsula Landowners Group. People attended the forum from every district in the electorate, from Foul Bay to Port Broughton. It really was an extraordinary turnout, and quite a few impassioned pleas were made on that night asking for help from the Minister. A number of motions were passed, and as an interesting aside, the Liberal Party Rural and Regional Council passed an identical resolution recently, Mr Deputy Speaker. But on that night, a number of motions were passed, and I would have judged those amendments or motions having passed unanimously. Certainly there was overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming support. Unfortunately, the Liberal Party room did not see fit to endorse those amendments when I presented them, despite my strongest argument and the clear, obvious will of the people. And all from the people whose support I relied on to be elected as their representative in this place. Needless to say, their views and needs remain very important to me and will be for as long as I'm the member for Narunga. The issue of balancing competing land uses is undoubtedly a difficult one. There is no denying that. However, landowners own the land above those minerals, and existing law has it that it's okay for their valuable asset to be destroyed in order for mining companies to access those minerals. An asset that carries value, the prized soil that they own, and in many cases their families have owned and cared for 150 years, the dirt that mines grain, if you like, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can do so with certainty for 150 more years at least, is far less valued against a mineral mine, often for a mine with a life as little as 13 years. And only on a guess of what might be under the ground, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that benefit of land ownership waived. Even people from the mining sector acknowledge that it is impossible to remediate an open-cut mine that can be 450 metres deep and kilometres square wide to anything like it was before the mine commenced. The economic contribution of agriculture to our state is a vital one too that deserves recognition. Enough arable land is being absorbed by urban sprawl, changing climate conditions and other such factors that our arable land is becoming increasingly scarce. At the same time that is happening, the world population is growing significantly and rapidly. There continues to be an increasing number of mouths that need to be fed and a decreasing land mass capable of producing the food that can do so. I would even make the argument, Mr Deputy Speaker, that arable land is as precious a resource and increasingly precious as any mineral that can be found under the ground. Particularly when exploration mapping shows there is an abundance of copper and other elements still waiting to be mined further north on pastoral lands where mining is a more expected and welcome activity that has prospered the state for generations. And I note a story in today's Advertiser advertising further discovery of minerals near Carrapateena. That's called having your cake and eating it too, when we dig up prime cropping land that is used to feed the nation. The agriculture industry in South Australia contributes 4.5% of the gross state product from approximately 5% of the state's land that is arable. That, by definition, prime cropping land. Across Australia, other states value their arable land through more legislation of stronger rights for farmers, the same rights I'm advocating for today. They do so with less reliance on ag in their GSP, and I cite New South Wales as an example. New South Wales has 17% of its land considered arable, with only contributing 2% of its GSP. Queensland GSP features only 3.2% from the ag industry, while Western Australia, which is the model I prefer for competing land use, has only a 3.86% contribution to the GSP. Of all cited jurisdictions, South Australia relies, and has always done, most heavily on ag to fuel its state's economy, yet we are the state that offers least legislative protection for farmers. Why have we lagged behind, Mr Deputy Speaker? The grapes and wheat that feature so prominently on this carpet are evidence of our long-standing reliance. To suggest that reliance is a fading is a folly, and that mining needs to be encouraged because it can provide us with growth opportunity is also a folly. In the 16-17 financial year, the agricultural contribution towards the gross state product raised by 30%. Our farmers are getting better, producing more with less and creating a wider range of produce. Off-farm development continues to improve as well. The technology development in machinery is astounding. I know very little about the intricacies of farm machinery, but every time I visit the Pascoeville field days, there seems to be a new feature, new machine or development that is pushing farming into the future. There is great excitement in science as well, particularly if the independent review into GM crops recommends that they finally be permitted in South Australia. That permission, if it is granted, will spur on a new wave of research and development in a field that hasn't been allowed to progress. The opportunities that it could create in a sector that has been completely untapped in South Australia are exciting. Ag is a real growth area in my opinion, Mr Deputy Speaker. Its importance to the state hasn't diminished since this carpet was designed and doesn't look like diminishing anytime soon. Giving freehold landowners full autonomy over their land is, in my view, an inherently liberal thing to do. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are the party of small government, free enterprise and individual freedom. There is nothing liberal about prioritising one private enterprise over another because it is perceived to be more lucrative in the short term. It is inconceivable to me, Mr Deputy Speaker, that a government would knock on the door of a generational cafe in metropolitan Adelaide and order them to leave because the government would prefer a car yard be built for the increased payroll tax it would receive. However, in regional South Australia, the government knocks on the door of farmers and says, we would prefer the royalties that come along with the mine, so you have to vacate your home and business. We respect the cafe owner's right to the freedom to operate the business, but not the farmers. The question I ask, Mr Speaker, is why? A Liberal government should have no need for a short-term cash injection. This is supposed to be a government focused on responsible spending of taxpayer money and leaving people to determine their own destiny. Continuing to allow the court to find in favour of the miner 100% of the time, forced to waive away the exemption clause in the Mining Act that was designed to protect him and her at a considerable personal expense to boost. There is no individual freedom in having your land taken away from you against your will because the government prioritises an alternate use. Having said that, there are other options in other jurisdictions that would present workable solutions for South Australia. Both New South Wales and Queensland use planning law to ensure that vital agricultural land is protected. That could be appropriated here for use in South Australia, but there needs to be greater protection for farmers. This Act clearly is in need of a major revamp and not minor tweaks. I also respectfully disagree with our plan to push the current minor amendments made to this bill through in a Phase 1, on the promise of a more thorough look at access rights in Phase 2. I would like to know why the reform can't happen in one thorough process. Mr Speaker, the need for those amendments was canvassed in a grieve I delivered in this place during the previous sitting week. The Harrop family, who are in the gallery today, I believe, have had to put up with an almost 2-year courtroom battle. A perfect example of a big, powerful mining company trying to wield its impressive power over what is essentially a small, family-owned business. Credit to Neil and Jackie, who in trying personal circumstances have refused to be intimidated by the power imbalance and fought it all the way. Despite being, in my personal opinion, grossly in the wrong, the mining company continues to drag things out because it can. This is part of the imbalance of rights that we need to redress. Interestingly enough, I received correspondence from a former employee of this company. I'll keep the correspondence from this employee confidential, but I can assure this place that it is legitimate. I would like to read out parts of the employee's email if I could, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I quote, "I will say that their behaviour, in this case the behaviour of the mining company, is not uncommon in the mineral and mining industry. Bullying of landowners, freehold or perpetual lease seems to be an accepted way to operate. It is only after becoming aware of the situation on York Peninsula and delving deep into the role of DEM and other government departments that I realise the farmers have little in the way of reasonable rights and that there are no consequences for mineral explorers or miners doing the wrong thing. DEM are very reluctant to penalise breaches of the Mining Act and actively provide shortcuts for miners to obtain licences and approvals." I continue to quote, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have worked in the mineral exploration industry for 30 years. I have too now concluded that many operators in this industry are happy to willingly breach exploration and mining conditions and not fulfil their obligation to landowners. The Harrops situation is not a one-off. I have to now agree with farmers and keep the gates shut. Mr Speaker, these are words from within the industry acknowledging exactly what I'm trying to rectify today. There are mining companies out there who are voluntarily breaching the rules because they can, because the power imbalance with regard to both size of operation and legal backing allows them to do so. This needs to be rectified. Other amendments that have been discussed, but not necessarily those up for debate today, these are amendments that I've discussed privately with other members about a solution to the land access issue, fall short in my opinion. It is my view that it is important that any solution actually gives the farmers the ability to alter the result of an approach by a mining company. Other amendments merely seek to frustrate the process more, to drag it out and make it harder. That doesn't even the balance, in my opinion, Mr Deputy Speaker. Larger mining companies are still better placed to withstand an elongated process. We can make landowners jump through as many hoops as imaginable. Many mediation sessions, compulsory negotiation, site visits, extra compensation, and so on and so on. If farmers aren't granted the ability to change the result, then what is the point of going through the process? If the result is predetermined, as it is now, then the process will only cause greater financial strain and misguided hope for farmers, and at the end of it all, the result will mean they're displaced from home and business. One of the things I prefer in the Liberal Party over other parties is the focus on making things happen rather than just talking about things. On action, not discussion. If we don't give the farmers the ability to alter the result, then all of the changes are moot. Mr Speaker, in summary, I commend this government and Minister Dan Van Holst-Pellekaan and the Premier for the things this government has done for primary producers already. The Liberal Party is a fantastic party for allowing its members to express points of view freely without fear or reprimand from the party. To constituents and industry stakeholders for the overwhelming support that I've received from the electorate in advocating for this change, I say thank you. They inspire me, and it's not just the farming community that is supportive, Mr Deputy Speaker. A great deal of Narungga residents who do not farm appreciate what freehold land should mean, an unalienable right to possess that land and do whatever one wishes to do on that land. I implore members of this place to take this opportunity to rethink this bill. This is an important opportunity we have to have a vision for what the future of South Australia looks like. Let's have a long-term look at this thing, further away than election cycles and even our respective careers in this place. Bearing in mind the weed on the carpet and the infinite future it provides our state, we need to ensure we care for it. I know that there is support from the Greens and SA Best in the Upper House to amend this bill to provide some support to the long-term vision. They recognise, as I do and a number of my colleagues do, that this bill does not go far enough. The balance between farmer and miner is significantly out of kilter and needs to be rectified. Having the foresight to protect our agricultural land will not mean the end of mining in South Australia. It only makes up less than 5% of the state, and there is plenty of dirt up north that would be welcome hosts of mining. We need to be a state that truly provides appropriate balance between mining and agriculture, with fruitful results for both. Mr Speaker, I will not oppose this bill at second reading because I would wish the debate to proceed to committee so the merits of amendments can be fleshed out properly. Having said that, I wholeheartedly reserve my right to oppose this bill after third reading.
Member for